and then the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And surprisingly enough, I was really interested, especially in, I don't know if you remember in '76, the movie Midway came out,
Sure. Yeah.
right? And I loved, the story of the four, four carriers getting sunk by the pilots, and I really was gung ho, loving the Navy stuff.
Yeah.
But around that same time, also Jaws came out, and Quint's Indianapolis speech was enough to remind me that I really didn't want to be.
Did
Say
Jaws
again?
help end your Navy aspirations?
Yeah, it put it to second choice.
Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Mike Reed, Cullum number 43600. We'll hear about Mike's rise through the building of power plants to the ranks of AI creating software engineers. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any organization, most particularly General Electric. Mike Reed, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Cullum number 43600 might be the most memorable Cullum number in the class. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Memorable for its number sequence, at least.
Right. What was your nickname at the academy? Because your howitzer entry just says Reed, but that's your name.
That's about it. I didn't have any nicknames. It was always like Reed or Michael. I never really went by Michael. My mother called me Michael. But
right.
That was pretty much it. Reed.
Reed. That's it.
Yeah.
But that's actually your name. That's technically not a nickname. I think we should find a letter to the scoop or something. So let's go back to 1978 to 81, Torrance, California.
Yeah.
Young Mike Reed. Now, there's a reference in your howitzer entry about studying Napoleon. So talk a little bit about a young Mike Reed. What was it about West Point being the California guy? There he is.
Is he back there? There he is.
There he is. Yeah. What was it that caught your eye about West Point?
I was born in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And so generations had gone back and watched to go to the Army-Navy game.
Yeah. Okay.
And I follow Army. And I remember watching, movies about West Point. Francis and the Talking Mule goes to West Point, Long Gray Line, things like that. And, I think On Brave Old Army Team might have been one of the first fight songs I had learned.
Really? Look at that.
Yeah.
Well, I got you ahead of the curve a little bit when you got there.
In that, one of the things I did, as a kid is I loved reading, I loved reading history books and study books, and I would read about the Army stuff, World War II especially, and then started going further back, Civil War, Revolutionary War, and then the Napoleonics, and then the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And surprisingly enough, I was really interested, especially in, I don't know if you remember in '76, the movie Midway came out.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And I loved, the story of the four carriers getting sunk by the pilots, and I really was gung ho, loving the Navy stuff.
Yeah.
But around that same time, also Jaws came out. And Quint's Indianapolis speech was enough to remind me that I really didn't want to be.
Did Jaws help end your Navy aspirations?
Yeah, it put it to second choice.
That's funny.
So
that'd be Horatio Nelson behind you if it weren't for Jaws. What was it in high school that you focused on? Were you an athlete? Were you academics? Or what was it that...
I played a lot of sports. I was never top level. I played soccer from the time I was, about 6 or 7. I still play it, actually.
Okay.
So letter-wise, though, my dad suggested, hey, you really need to have a sport to letter in because it helps you if you're going to be, going to the academy.
Sure.
Trying to get to the academy. And so I ran track and field.
Okay.
I pole vaulted, I hurdled, and I triple jumped, and then filled in other areas.
But it was enough to get you into the academy, obviously, the sports you played and your academics.
It kept me athletic. I was very active in Boy Scouts as a kid.
Okay.
that's really where I realized that the outdoors and hiking and things like, and being able to do that clicked with me,
Yep. Yep.
which would naturally let you understand, and we'll probably get into it later, is why I decided to go in the infantry.
Did all that activity help you? You feel like that gave you a good grounding to get it once you got there?
I was an Eagle Scout, so
The
I
Eagle
mean, I
Scout.
had,
Oh, you were an Eagle
yeah,
Scout.
well, I got, yeah,
Great.
you don't want to see this picture of me at 17.
There you go.
And so I had that the full rounded thing. They say they want the rounded individual. My grades were not 4.0s. It was about, high B's,
Right.
low A's, but I had sort of all those different lines. So I was able to go to the individual academic workshop the year before, or the summer before our beast. Not so in 81.
You did
Yeah. Yeah.
from California.
Yep.
That's amazing because obviously it's easy to get there from the East Coast, but from California, good for you.
Well, I had family in the Philadelphia area and
Yeah, right.
outside
That's
southeastern
great.
Pennsylvania.
So when you went
And
there on our day, you'd been for that program. So wow, it was always unnerving
at
for
least
all
I'd
of us.
seen the place.
Seen the place. Yeah, yeah.
And,
So fascinating.
you know, once you get on the place, and you've probably realized that, you fall in love with it. Especially when you're not doing it as, your first blast at
Yeah, right.
it's when my parents took my son up there,
You
yeah,
read a lot. You read about Napoleon. You read about history, and then you were there marching on the plane.
yeah.
What compare and contrast? Like, what was it? What it would feel like to actually be doing it versus reading about it? What were your thoughts as an 18-year-old standing on the plane?
Well, the actual doing it and running through it's one thing. The thoughts in my head is, man, I should learn to keep my mouth shut more often. That was that was. But the other
Well,
problem I have
I'm
there,
glad
and
you said it, Mike.
okay, is that
You
I
were a chatty fella.
yeah. Well, and the thing is, I have resting smirk face.
You do. You
And,
do. I remember you might have been corrected on that look a few times.
well, several times,
Yeah,
several times.
just a few.
Statura, oi, it's
Bruce
like,
Statura, what a good fella. I'm sure he's a watcher of the podcast and a big fan of the Class 86. What was your setup as a plebe?
the big things were. I remember our TAC, Captain Bingham,
Yeah.
because, he probably would never know. I was somewhat the one who gave him the nickname Lead Bottom
Oh, tell me,
from
how did
Captain
that happen?
Binghamton of McHale's Navy.
Yeah.
Had he known that, I think I would have got a bigger slug when I
I'm pretty
actually.
sure that the good Captain Bingham would not have appreciated that. He was a very professional and straight up.
You remember that salute?
How can you forget it? How did you cope with plebe year? Just what kept you sane? What was your
What
coping
kept me
mechanism?
sane?
Yeah.
Probably the library
Really?
and the stacks.
The stacks. Goodness gracious. I miss those
Because
stacks, man.
when I drove Dosh and Scott insane, I'm sure it would happen more often than not, and I just needed to go someplace where I was still on academic limits,
Yep.
but still, away from being hazed or just being able to think. I would go to the library and go searching through the stacks. I remember looking through a bunch of old howitzers,
Yeah.
the Red Reader books, found Colonel Esposito's, Atlas of the Wars of Napoleon, things like that. I would just, and it was my escape. And there was music there too. You remember you go to the music room
Yeah.
and pull some records and put something on. Well, just something, but you wouldn't get harassed when you're in the library.
That's quite clever you did that though. That you figured that out as a plebe.
I had a bit of an idea, I still do, although it's failing of late, a bit of an eidetic memory. So I could read something and it would stay in.
Is that right?
and I would do what's necessary to get the homework done that we applied. But other than that, I didn't have a lot of cramming studies and things like that, especially in the first year stuff we had.
For what was it like going from the C4 Cowboys that was very strict to E3 um, in the
Where
third
Eagles
grade?
dare.
How'd you find that?
That it was kind of interesting of a change. I mean, we were out there on the sixth floor. Had gone from MacArthur over to Eisenhower.
Right.
Went from the fourth floor to the sixth. Third reg was so much more laid back.
I think that's
I think one of the changes was I went from walking my area tours in North area to walking them in Central area.
You did. And what
Yeah.
did you get tours for? Now that you mention it, because you never really came off as a rascal back then. But what was it? What types of tours would you get?
Well, the most infamous one I got was the 8 and 8 for I was essentially slugged by the BP. I don't know if you when I was in
Plugged by
C4.
the barracks police.
AT.
Yeah. What was the circumstance? Excessive
Let's
dust.
just say she was an active member of the fourth class system. And I remember one time I'd take the newspapers out to dump them in the car or things like that. And she threw them back in. And I slammed the door and not realizing that the door pounced back up. I said, what a,
Oh yeah. See, that's yeah.
and then of course
You can't do that's
my
that mouth.
squad leader
You
wanted to,
can't do that.
but I feel like I was an underachiever because I ended up with somewhere in the 90s. I needed like one more 8 and 8 to
90
actually make it an
hours.
accomplishment.
That's a lot of
Right.
hours trucking back and forth on the area and belts and
For the area, and then some punishment tours in the
Yeah.
in the room confinement later on.
well, then you should have
But
tried harder to get that sentry status.
that's the thing. Is at least somebody who gets 100 hours has earned the Centuryman badge, right?
So, what did you study at the academy? What was your major?
Mechanical engineering and
Really?
energy
Okay. So
systems
that's
design.
right up the gut. And you're an engineering kind of guy. The eidetic memory certainly helped.
My father was an engineer. My grandfather was a surveyor engineer. And heck, my son is an engineer.
Okay.
So it runs in the Reed male line.
There you go. Right, because engineering is
So-
genetic. So
I'm thinking it is. There's certain parts of it because when certain things come easy to you and run through, that's what it seems like that's what your calling is.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but then my first roommate at in E3 was Skinny McKinney.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember
Skinny.
Mike McKinney,
Yep.
which he always reminded me of the guy in Cool Hand Luke. What we've got here is failure to communicate.
I went on spring
Yeah.
break with Skinny sophomore year.
Yeah,
I
that's
can't even-
Talladega, Alabama.
I was
Right.
down to Talladega with Skinny. I did. Yeah, that was fun. What was it about infantry that had you?
Well,
Because you even talked about infantry as a plebe, so it was a pretty consistent theme.
yeah, it was one one of the things I remember watching in the movies, Audie Murphy,
Yep.
To Hell and Back.
Yep.
He was an infantryman. I read the book, and I despise the movie, but I read the book Starship Troopers, the noble infantrymen, that what the English call the PBI, the poor bloody infantry, right?
Yeah.
At the sharp end, really is a glory of its own.
Yeah. So you imbibed that a bit.
Yeah, I pulled that in when I was in between yearling and cow year. I knew where I stood with my new tack, Major Pretz. He was the Air Force guy.
Uh-huh.
And where I stood in the class was about middling as far as grades and rank. So I knew I wasn't going to get my first choices, but I definitely wanted to go to airborne school. And I definitely wanted, to do something useful. And I wanted to go to DCP.
Okay.
Everybody else wanted to go to CTLT. So I figured if I volunteer for DCP, I'm probably going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Airborne school, was something I wanted to do. Even though I had hiked many mountains and like that, I wanted to basically confront myself because, as you remember, I was a little tiny guy and I was like toughening up the whole thing. I still remember Lake Frederick, going through, the bayonet assault course
Yeah.
and hitting back to back to back, like the captain of the lacrosse team, the captain of the hockey team, the captain of the football team, was
Inevitably, that's
on
how
my
it works,
course. But
right?
but I something clicked in my head as a cadet, and I carried it all the way through, and I carried it when I went to Ranger School and everything else. They're not in the job of legally killing you, right? They want you to survive, but they want you to, pull in. So I figured if I constantly get up off the mat and keep on trying and doing like that, even though I might not be the biggest guy there, I'm going to pass it. I'm going to get through it. I went to airborne school. I had the 4 week version because those nonverbals came back and bit me in the ass once. I coming out of the 34-foot tower on my first jump, and I didn't, I sort of hesitated out and I kicked out or something like that. And when I got to the other end, Sergeant Airborne told me, you kicked out. And I guess I must have given him a look like,
Ooh,
go F
yeah,
yourself.
those nonverbals.
Even though I said hooah, and I ended up with,
Gave him a look.
if they gave a master blaster for jumps out of the 34-foot tower, I got him. And I got to do it 2 weeks in a row. So,
well, you got the nonverbal and the verbal all going all at once. So they
I'm
in trouble.
I knew enough to keep my mouth shut with the actual verbal mouthing off,
but
it would still come with the eye.
Oh, brother, I got to tell you, you traveled a hard path.
Yeah. Well, and then in first year, I realized that I wasn't going to get, some sort of high beast detail or something like that. So I put it to my mind to go do something that would have, even though it was going to be long, it was going to be fun. So I applied for the infantry committee slot at Camp Buckner.
Sure.
Why? Well, one, I got my dad gave me his Corvette as a firstie.
Yeah.
So I had a Corvette.
Your dad's Corvette got it right up in the howitzer, by the way. Well, if you were in the middle of the class, infantry, you probably had a few assignments you could have gone to. What attracted you to an assignment in Germany?
Okay, well, I was 100 out of 200 in the infantry.
Yeah.
And so, if you recall, we had Tex Turner as the head of the DMI.
Famously.
Studley Tex, right? Everybody wanted to go light infantry.
Yeah.
Including myself. And being from California, there's this beautiful place in Monterey called Fort Ord.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm setting my sights. I'm already knowing, guys like Pompeo and Tim Steele, they're going to get all the Vicenza slots. Hawaii's going to be gone. The 82nd will be gone. But let me see what's on that second tier. Second infantry that's over in Korea, which is a Path Rangers. Right.
Yep.
Those will all be gone. And I'm just going to give that up. I can see with the previous years, they all went. So I said, all right, I'm going to be, I'm drafting in the second tier. I'm going to, my second rounder here. What do I want to do? And I saw, well, heck, the 7th Infantry in Monterey, they've got slots, and it didn't draft until like 110, lose its last slot. I said, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go to Monterey. Mom and Dad are going to love it. I'm just up the coast 6 hours, right? And I know California. California. It's beautiful, and especially Monterey. Stay out of the water. Lots of sharks, by the way.
Well, that's Jaws phobia coming back. Yeah.
But that's where I'm thinking. It's I've got it set, and we're in the auditorium, on that draft day, where everybody's standing up.
Yeah.
And I see the usual suspects go away, but here's, 7th ID. It's got like 5 slots, and I'm 10 away. Boom, 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 boom. 4 of them are gone. There's 1 slot left, and I'm 2 away. And the guy, I forget his name, he stood up. He took the last slot in front of me. Now I'm on the clock, and I, in my head, didn't have any backup. So I'm looking at the board. I can go to the 101st with an air assault, but that's like in the middle of the country. And I can go anywhere I want to in Germany, including the Berlin Brigade. And I almost did Berlin Brigade, but then I figured I didn't really want to be a speed bump.
Yeah.
Or that type of speed bump, a surrounded one. So I went to a different type of speed bump. And in the back of my head, I remember that the captain that was the head of our infantry committee pod was a third ID vet, that Audie Murphy was in the third ID,
There's your Audie Murphy.
and
There you go.
the third ID got the first Bradleys in the Army.
So
And
there.
I said, okay, well, if I can't do that, I'll get a Bradley at least, not a 113.
The choice was obvious. There you go. Okay.
So it's, it's interesting that little decisions, split decision like that in the course of your life, and what you see is, so I end up getting there and getting to go to Schweinfurt, West Germany.
Yeah, right.
Well, I met my wife in Schweinfurt. She was actually stationed in Delta 352 ADA.
There you go. See,
So the path of my life would have been totally different had I not
absolutely
just, that split second, so you look back sometimes, those split second decisions.
hanging out in that fog enshrouded Fort Ord, you'd have never met your lovely wife.
Yes, exactly.
See,
And
that's the lesson.
I went to Ranger School.
Mechanized infantry platoon leader in the third ID.
Yep. I was a mechanized infantry platoon leader in the third ID. So I had a platoon of Bradleys for 15 months.
Yep.
So when I get to 230 Infantry, the Wild Boars in Schweinfurt, our S3 was this hard charging guy that came out of, who had been a P in the social department, Major Petraeus.
Oh, there you go.
Later on General.
Yeah.
And he wanted to sort of rehabilitate the mortar platoon because they had failed 3 or 4 years of RTEPs in a row.
Right.
And he says, you got the course like that. This is your, here, I'm giving you another platoon. And a week before Reforger, I had to sign my Bradley platoon over to my platoon sergeant and sign in for an entire mortar platoon and meet them as we're getting ready to go to the trains to take us down southern Germany for Reforger 88.
How fun.
But I thank for that, because that meant I had 19 months at that. So I had 34 months of platoon time.
That's amazing. But obviously you were doing a pretty good job, or they wouldn't have left you in there that long.
Or the other flip side could be that, I was the only one qualified to do it.
Wow.
Got to figure out.
But if you're really all thumbs at any task in the Army, they kind of rotate you quietly out because they don't want to.
Well, yeah, I wasn't all thumbs. So, but it was also, you don't typically see people's paths to general go through the mortar platoon.
You ended up doing that tour, and then I looked at your LinkedIn. Then you decided to leave the Army. What was the thinking in terms of moving on to the next career?
Well, it was sort of a mutual decision there. They were drawing down because the wall had fallen, and it looked like we didn't have a mission.
Yep.
And so when I was passed on the captain's board, I said, all right, well, why don't I just go to the reserves?
Okay. But
I still wanted to stay, connected. I mean, because we always, once you go in, you're connected for life, really.
Sure.
I get out in August of '90. I'm signing my a leave paper, and I'm watching. I'm at Fort Jackson, and I'm watching Saddam's tanks going into Kuwait,
right,
on CNN. And I get my DD 214, and they say, "Go on your way." I had a job waiting for me. One of the VPs at Parsons was an old family friend. He says, "You got to, you get out. I'll get you a job as an engineer." Right. So I go in from wearing a uniform to wearing the white shirt with the tie and the blazer and in the old IBM standard, whatever you see every engineer wearing, up until, the 70s or 80s. My first project manager had been the plant manager of that was commissioned a plant in Kuwait. So those tanks that I saw were going in, they evacuated him out across the border and got him away. The boss said, "I'd like to send you out to a power plant that we have at a prison to learn how to operate and get a hands-on feeling for all this stuff you're doing the designs on, to catch you up." Because I know you're smart enough to do all this, but I need somebody out there. So we had a power plant that was in that prison. It was really cool. I got to use some of my Army skills.
No kidding.
I remember one time I got CS gassed because they were having a riot across the street, and the gas came down. 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning, coming off shift, and I'm walking out and I said, "What in the?"
Yeah.
I thought we had an ammonia leak. The plant manager up there said, "Hey, I want to take you from this spot here, and we're going to be commissioning and operating a power plant at UCLA."
Okay, that's
So I go from a
a
prison,
different sort of institution. Sure.
yes, a prison up in the valley, to basically UCLA, Westwood.
Did your girlfriend at the time, wife now, or did she come back with you?
She was my wife by that time. Yeah,
Wife by that time. Okay, great. And what did she make
yeah.
of 50 miles to a prison for a, was she just doing her
She
thing?
wasn't too enamored of it. The worst part was when the LA riots hit. I was up in the plant,
Right.
and she was like 7 or 8 months pregnant back at the house.
Yeah, right. That's
Yeah.
unsettling.
And then when the Landers Big Bear quakes hit, I was up at that plant. The Landers plate quake hit, shook it home, and she's like 9 months pregnant.
Goodness gracious. Yeah.
And then I get home, and the second, everything calmed down, and then the second one hits. So when the Northridge earthquake hit, that power plant did not go offline. The way we had built it, it was not going to go offline, but it was still tied to the Los Angeles grid, and it tried to power the entire Southern California grid and sped off the line.
Oh, really?
It tripped off. And
So
it
did you
was
like
nice
that?
because
Did you like that work? That very physical. That's very.
I did, because it's rewarding. When you turn a valve and something happens,
Yeah.
you like it. Now you see the results of your work. When you do a design and you finally see the prototype work, you get to see the results of it. And here, a lot of the Army stuff came back.
Yeah.
Here, stimulus response. You see what happened. You know what happens. When that big earthquake hit and we needed to get the thing back online, we were the first power plant in the basin that got back up online. But we ran UCLA as a power island, basically not tied to anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we got it up and running, so the hospital and all these lab things that were needed power like that was going to stay running, and we ran it like our own little private grid
Yeah.
for about
Right.
a week. So I was the senior guy on site, and we made the call. All right, we're going to literally override outlooks to run power backwards in order to power up this diesel generator, or from the diesel generator power up the turbine, so we can start the turbine up, get the turbine started, and then we can start wrapping other things up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like you go back into Army mode. It's like
Yeah,
boom,
right.
boom, boom, and so that
To
calmness under fire type thing.
taking responsibility, calmness under fire.
Right.
Super interesting.
So
What?
I realized that I love doing the field stuff.
And yet your career takes. I mean, your resume is amazing. So you go from that kind of work, and then you end up in analytics. Like, this is many years later.
Yeah.
But how did you make that shift from the very physical? Because you could have made a complete career out of power plants.
Oh, and I did. I'm somewhat on my third career, if I count the Army as the first
Right.
career.
I mean, so how did you kind of work from physical power plants to really the data side? Now you're working on AI, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Yeah,
with
and-
your memory.
Right. So the physical power plants, were there, and I would get more experience, with Design House.
Sure.
Then I started doing stuff globally. I got to do power plants in Hong Kong when it was still a British colony, and then right when it was a
Yeah.
Chinese protectorate, or whatever you want to call it now, special administration zone. I later on, I actually went. It's interesting. When I was active duty, I got off before Desert Storm, right?
Yep.
When I was in the reserves, I got out right around time 9/11 hit. Now, and I end up going to Iraq as a civilian contractor, starting up power plants.
Really?
And actually one in particular, Baghdad East, or Al Quds is what they call it now.
Yeah. Right.
And then Nigeria.
Nigeria.
Spent a year in Nigeria. I was just like the Army. GE doesn't promise you. They promise you one thing and possibly deliver another.
Sure.
They told me I'd be commissioning something in Key West, Florida, Aberdeen, South Dakota, or I think it was Lexington, Kentucky.
Right.
At the time, I'm living in Cincinnati. My wife is from Omaha, so going to South Dakota wouldn't be a problem at all. Key West is Key West. And I show up in Houston for onboarding, and they said those projects have all been pushed back a year, but we just lost our guy in Nigeria, and when we noticed that you're up to date on all your shots and you've traveled globally, do you want to take this job or shall we cancel your contract? So
That is fantastic. You're right. You're
yeah,
up to date on all your shots. That's the
yeah. Well, yeah, because coming back from Iraq, right?
yeah. But I thought I was going to Key West. Nope. You're up to date
Exactly.
on your shots. Nigeria.
So I
You.
spent the next year on and off between Nigeria, Houston, and Cincinnati. I got to enjoy and experience
So
the.
just tell one crazy experience from Nigeria, because I can't imagine that you
Well,
didn't encounter some absolutely wild
there.
stuff there.
I guess part. Okay. The one I remember, there's a lot of corruption there,
Sure.
obviously. And anytime we were going, the job that we were doing, the ultimate owner was this Dangote Industries. Mr. Dangote is the richest man in Africa. And this was a Dangote cement plant that we were building the power plant to support the cement plant that's going in at the same time. And typically it was a way to get out of issues with going through customs and things like that. Is that you're working for Dangote, they make sure that you're working through.
There was a
And was
facility.
talking to the Dangote people,
Yeah.
and on his way back from talking to it, he saw the GE symbol outside my office and the FL Schmidt for the Danish group out there, and he decided to come in. He comes in there and he's like, he goes, "Tell me, what type of passport do you or visa do you have to be working here?" And it's like, I said, "Right here." And I pull it out and I pop it up. And he's like, "You hand that to me." I said, "No, I'm not handing it to you." It's like, and then he goes, "You must do it." And I said, "I am not handing it to you." At which time, my two security guys show up right behind him. And turns out he's trying to fleece me
Sure.
to like pay some money to go away. Because he had the security guy with him too. And I turned to my guy, I said, "If a guy makes a move for me, shoot him in the knees." He goes, "Shoot him." I said, "You want to shoot him?" I said, "Just shoot him in the knees." I just don't want him to be able to run away with me. So I said, "If not, hand me the weapon. I'll have to do it." The next day, I get an official apology from the Nigerian government saying, "This guy's not working here anymore." I was like, "Wow."
Oh wow. Okay.
I said,
Well,
"I
I'm
wasn't
sure
asking for him there. I just,
I'm sure
you know,
the big wigs at Nangote might have had Nangote might have had
the
a
only
hand in that, right?
the only other weird experience was getting malaria.
Oh, that's not good.
That's that's like
Is that something that sticks with you forever, right? And malaria is always kind of
yeah. I mean, well, that's why gin tonics are good because of quinine in the in the tonic water.
good. I'm glad I know that now. So now I have an excuse.
Site and the Iraq site were the sites that I was with that safety and OSHA did not exist.
Yeah. Right. Not
I remember seeing some things that are like that. Especially you had a guy walking on high steel in Iraq and he's not tied off, and I said, Mr. Hussein, he ain't tied up there, and this guy's like, "If he falls, inshallah." The Nigeria site, they had a couple snake bite deaths. It's
a couple snake bite.
yeah.
Yeah. Talk about how you went from physical plants like that to all the data
Yeah.
side. So there's a lot of data jobs
Yeah.
in AI. How did that transpire?
Okay. In 2009 or so, I'd been working here in the Chicago area at an engineering firm, and that engineering firm was downsizing its force in the Midwest. So I got at the level I got laid off.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sitting here and I put out my resume, praying that I get something before I actually have to pay for Cobra. And I get a hit from this company called Smart Signal,
Uh huh.
and they're looking for people what they call customer monitoring managers. So they needed industry experts. So I signed on as their expert in combined cycle and simple cycle power plant technology, which is the type of plants that I had started up and
Yeah, makes
designed and
sense.
operated, and did that for a while. And lo and behold, a year later, GE buys this company.
And then
GE, I just
back
feel
to
like Al
Nigeria.
Pacino. Just when I was out, they pulled me back in, right?
Back to
And
Nigeria for you. You got your shots up to date.
yeah, so this is like my third or so, experience working with GE, and they never end well.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and I happened to just one day, well, it was after a reorganization where I got pushed under somebody I didn't want to be under. I put my resume out. About an hour later, I get a call from a headhunter, and 2 hours later, I'm on a phone interview with the company that was InStep Software that had a similar software to Smart
Uh
Signals.
huh.
I went in for the interview the next week, and on the spot, my interview changed from just somebody to do the monitoring to somebody to head up and build a group to do all this. So I became the Monitoring Diagnostic Services Center manager, or
There you
basically the
go.
manager around this. I was able to go and work with our salespeople when we were selling it as the technical knowledge guy.
Yeah.
So it's sort of in a software company, I was a square peg in a round hole. Position I've been in a lot of my life. That's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you develop the expertise that
Yeah.
they need the peg, right? Otherwise, they're just software guys
Right.
without context. So that makes that good for you though. So you just
And
reinvented yourself as a software guy.
and so you're having to explain to them this is what goes into the box. This is where the magic's done, and this is what comes out.
Yeah,
The only thing that's the magic is the algorithm itself.
right.
They need to understand fully what goes into it and what goes out to it, and what do these results mean. It seems in the pattern of my life, every time I go someplace, they get bought. Instep was bought out by Schneider Electric.
Yeah,
Schneider Electric's a big behemoth, headquartered in Paris, which is a lot nicer place to visit than Schenectady.
depends on the part of Paris, but yeah,
Well, yeah, but when I would go visit them, I was put up in a hotel like a block away from the Arc de Triomphe.
yeah.
So I'm
That's the
not
nice
just
part of
complaining.
Paris. I agree with that. That is
Yeah,
better than Schenectady.
yeah.
I'm
I'm going to get to the 12th arrondissement.
amazing career. I mean, you went and you started as an infantryman. You got you're all the way up now, and the current role you're in is AI
Yeah,
at Avivia, right? So you literally took it. You remain on the cutting edge,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
fantastic.
And that's Instep. I've had the same manager all the way through.
Oh, that's
He's
great.
the head of our AI group,
Yeah, yeah.
and then I work for him and my team and others.
Any children from in your life?
Yeah. So I mentioned my wife Maureen. I met her, in West Germany,
Uh huh.
and that was in 1988. And we got married in 80, not towards the end of '89. So we're coming up on, I think, our 35th anniversary this year. I'm out. So she's from Omaha. She went to Creighton, and
Uh huh.
she was Air Defense Artillery, Hawk TCO. So, and then when we both got out around the same time, we went back to Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
My son was born in 1992. Travis is his name. Tra- Travis Glenn. His middle name is actually after my grandfather I was telling you about earlier on.
Uh huh.
And then we moved to Kansas City area when my wife was like 7 months pregnant with my daughter, Olivia Autumn. And so my son was born in Torrance. My daughter was born in Overland Park, Kansas, just Kansas City area.
Uh huh.
We lived in Olathe for quite some time, and then Olathe, Cincinnati, and now up here in Chicagoland. Geneva is about 50 miles west of Chicago
Uh huh.
on the Fox River.
So two kids,
Beautiful, beautiful little town.
two children.
And my son went to NIU,
How old are
right?
your kids now?
Well, my son just turned 32,
Yeah.
and my daughter is 29.
There you go.
Yes, she's married. She lives on the other side of town.
Good.
My son works. He works. It's kind of interesting, is because at one point I brought him in to intern for our developer guide because we needed something done on the software.
Uh-huh.
The developer didn't have enough bandwidth of his, from his team, and I said, "Look, I'll give you my firstborn.
There you go.
Can he intern here?" And he developed some code in order to get us over the hump, which
There you
is
go.
still being used today, which I'm
So that just
pleased
proves
with.
that engineering is genetic because he could just
Yeah,
develop that code.
he
So what advice would you give yourself of 20 years ago? You've had an incredible run.
it
Um, you're probably in the middle of your GED
would be easier if
year,
you kept your
somewhere in
mouth shut. I
Nigeria.
don't know.
What advice would you give yourself?
Well, I mean, the one thing I've always been able to bounce through is not quitting. Don't quit. It's like, it could be worse. Could be raining. I mean, it's kind of like that. One joke about the guy goes in and the people that are up to their necks in human excrement drinking coffee.
Yeah, yeah,
Coffee breaks over. Time to stand on your heads. Yeah, so it could always be worse.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, you know the it's you definitely can't do it by yourself. If I look back through the years, always had somebody that I could bounce off of as a confidant to help push it, whether it be my wife, whether it be colleagues, whether like that. It's back in the academy. I don't know whether guys realize it or not because I was not as much of a click type person, but they provided me strength to get through,
Sure.
whether they knew it or not. Sometimes, early on, sometimes it was in spite of them, right?
Yeah,
Especially C4. I'll tell you what, I was like, because I knew my success was going to piss Massey off. That was, that was my, it's like,
that's the best revenge.
but I wasn't going to, turn on Private Gomer Pyle on it, but it's like, no, I've got to get through,
Yeah,
you know, it's,
yeah,
but there is, it's to this day, I still have a camaraderie I can see from any of our classmates in there. Even if weird thing, I'm a very visual person,
uh-huh.
and I remember faces much more than names, which is kind of weird. It's like, why can't I put the two together? It's great when we had name tags on, right? It's right there.
Right.
Probably why I went by Reed, because
That's right.
it's easy.
You
It's an
remember
easy
your
one,
own.
I mean, it's easy to turn Reed into a sort of a nickname or a call like that.
What an adventure! What a life you've had from Torrance to Nigeria. You've done it all.
Yeah.
So, Mike Reed,
And now in
thanks so much for
Chicago.
being on the podcast. It's been great catching up.
I appreciate it, and
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.